So, Colina, you talked about, when I called you that time, about recognizing that Jesus had gone to hell on our behalf. And I always personalize that. Like, he went to hell on my behalf and yours. But that was this moment where, well, not a moment, about a month actually, where that was when God was just revealing things to me in rapid fashion. And I remember we probably spent way too much time on the phone, and that was back in the day when we had to pay for it.
Yes, yes.
And our husbands weren't really very happy about it.
I heard about it from my husband when he got the phone bill.
But it was, ironically, it was connected to what had happened in Alaska with Bob Ingram and Truett Euler. And we had some friends from there that were staying with us at the time. And they kind of came, we gathered in the garden in our backyard in Chico, and we started discussing, they started telling us some things. Well, out of that, it just like, God just started showing me things, and that was when I realized who Jesus was as the Son of God. Like, Jesus is God. Like, he is deity. And do you remember me sharing that with you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And just this like, whoa, he's not just a man.
Yeah.
He's not just an example that we follow. Like, God came in the form of his Son in the flesh. And I remember reading, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And then, 1 John 1, and then a few verses later, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And it was just like, so during that time, like, we were just nonstop reading our Bibles for like 3 weeks. And our friends that were staying in a trailer on our front driveway, we had 2 phone lines. So we had hooked one into their trailer for them to use for business, and then we had the one in the house. And sometimes it was just so exciting that I would just have to call her on the phone, and we weren't getting dressed. Like we were living in our PJs, and sometimes we weren't getting the kids dressed. It was such an interruption to change their diapers and feed them. So, they were getting,
poor kids.
Here's some cold cereal, and here's, cheese or whatever. We had 7 kids between us, under the age of about 5 or 6, I think. And I remember one time David saying to me, I'm so jealous. I have to go to work, and you guys get to stay home and read the Bible. And that was all, we were still primarily reading the King James, but I did have my sneaky little NIV that I would slip in occasionally. But it was just an incredible time where we were so excited about what God was showing to us, and it was amazing. And that was when our phone bill exploded. So I want to go back to when I mentioned the hair. Gather my thoughts a minute. I was talking about how it was a gradual change for me, gradual knowledge rather than a moment that I can point to. But I had a time when I was very, very wounded, very hurt, and I was angry, I was scared. It was the moment that I realized that the workers understood some things, and I thought, when we were going through the stuff with Gilroy, I thought it was just communication, and in my 20-something-year-old brain, I thought that I could clear up that communication, that I could fix it. So I was always trying to be that intercessor between my father and the workers. Like, surely he just hadn't explained things to them well enough. So it was the moment that I realized that they knew. They knew fully, they understood, and they didn't care. And so I was in my bedroom, I was screaming out the window, yelling at God. I was angry, I was afraid, and I was just yelling, God, are you there? Do you care? And is there a purpose of life? It was like everything had tumbled down. And I threw myself on my bed, and I was just pounding my fists into my pillow and crying, sobbing, ugly crying. And I heard a voice that said, you've built on the sand. And if you seek me with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul, that you will find me. And the tears stopped. The anger was gone. It was just like, boom, I had this, like I was just a bubble of peace. And I knew I was going to be okay. And I remember sitting up on the edge of my bed and thinking, well, apparently I don't even know who God is. Apparently I haven't found him. And now I thought in that moment that the problem was that I had put too much confidence in the workers and the friends, that this was still God's true way, but I had done it wrong. So I determined in that moment that I would start just like reading my Bible like all over, like just trying to let go of every thought I have of what it meant, and my goal was to find God. I did a bad thing, and I felt like I needed to be sneaky about it. So I went to this Bible bookstore and I bought a parallel Bible, which was the NIV in one column and the King James in the second column. And I felt really naughty. And then I also was determined that I was going to get a book that, I'm just going to buy a book that was written by somebody that didn't go to meeting. And so I looked and looked and looked, and I found the perfect book. I bought this big old fat volume. It's a commentary on the book of Revelation. That was my first purchase. But I do remember sitting in the bathtub, and I was reading it. And I was so excited because I remember coming out and telling David, the guy that wrote this book knows this. Like, I had read something and I had this aha moment, and I was so excited that this guy knew it too. And anyway, that was some of my early days of hearing from God.
For many years, because I've studied narcissism quite heavily, because I've experienced it in humans, I have come to believe that the 2x2 system is a narcissistic system, like communism, socialism, any authoritarian group or way of thinking or controlling people. It's high control. If you think about with a narc person, you're constantly thinking, like, if I could just explain it better, then they would understand. But what the missing link is with a narc system or a narc person, you can't reason with them. So would you say, in your experience, that now that I mentioned it, that yes, it's very, very much a narcissistic system?
I would absolutely say that. The narcissistic system prioritizes the system over people. And so it doesn't matter if someone gets hurt as long as the system looks good. And so some of the things that flow out of that would be you have a question that questions the system. The response to questioning is going to be you have a bad spirit. You're angry, you're bitter. Instead of answering the question, the narc system is going to shut you down.
Gaslighting, straw man, smoke screen, abuse, whatever. The attack, yeah.
And I mentioned that moment when I realized that they knew and they didn't care.
Yeah.
I had just had my life threatened by an elder that they looked to as someone who took care of business for them. He was somebody that was working on negotiations with the 1987 hymn book with, the people that do that. Alan and Son. Yeah. But this man had just threatened me. It was Jim on the phone. Told me that he was trying to get me to convince my dad to do something that my dad had already said he didn't want to do with regards to Gilroy and all of that. And I had told him no, and he said, you know, Bernitta, I've been known to hire somebody to take a man down a dark road where his body would never be found to convince him to do what I wanted him to do. And I responded, Jim, you do what you need to do. And I hung up the phone.
Oh, Bernitta.
And
She was in her 20s.
I was in my 20s. So that would have happened probably, right? It was probably in the fall of '87 that happened. I then got off the phone. I called and left a message with Eldon and with Sydney Holt, Eldon Tenniswood and Sydney Holt. Sydney was the one that called me back. And still in my little bubble of I don't know, the whole, like the narcissistic system, the person who allows it to continue. What is that person called? I don't remember.
It's not an enabler. It's a victim. I mean,
Yeah,
you're a...
it's like the flying monkeys, I guess.
Yeah.
And so still in that mode, I was horrified at what had just happened. And I just wanted them to know, this person that you're using for the hymn book this is what he just did. And I was very like, he's not a good witness for God. You know,
And you were so naive and innocent.
I was naive and innocent. And so I just thought they would want to know. So again, going back to that, I just thought they didn't know and they needed somebody to tell them these things. So I did. And the response was, you are maligning a good man's character and you have a bad spirit. That was what sent me screaming to my room and questioning God and his existence.
And feeling crazy.
And feeling crazy, and afraid and confused.
And nowhere to go. There's
nowhere to go. Completely spun. Like, who can I even talk to about this? Like, here's me, who I cannot remember a time when I wasn't in love with what I knew of God. And I just, it was all good.
Rug pulled out from under you.
Yeah. And that was the place where, like, everything changed.
That was a moment in time. There was a before and after on your timeline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A big line.
A big one. Mm-hmm. So tell me about that time when I was getting so excited about everything that God was showing me and calling you sometimes more than once in a day. Tell me how that was for you.
Well, one of the things I realized, just as you were talking about, discovering that Jesus is God, realizing that when you shared that with me, I had recognition that if Jesus is God, then we can't be like he was. So the way we were taught was that Jesus was just human like you and I, but he was so submitted to the Holy Spirit that he was perfect. And so that's what we were to strive towards. And that was what we were supposed to be working towards. And that realization that, no, I can never be perfect. I mean, we knew that, but we were still supposed to be trying to be more submitted to Holy Spirit. But to recognize that, no, he is God, and we can't be God. I can just be me and be submitted to him. And that was so awesome to have that realization. Such a load was lifted, that burden of we have to try to be perfect, but we know we never can be. And just the freedom that came with that.
And it was so futile.
Yes.
It was always so futile, and therefore that's that gesture and meeting of absolute objective despicableness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's such a futile Sunday to Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And the relief.
Yes. So I don't remember if I told you this at the time or not, but I remember a Sunday morning testimony that I gave when we were in the middle of all of this, the Gilroy stuff and the turmoil that caused and created. And I just had the feeling of, I've been through an earthquake and everything I believe in is gone except God. God is the only thing that is still there of all that I believed. And then God showed me that my faith wasn't in him. My faith was in the form. And just that realization that, yeah, I needed to be focused on him. Didn't have that recognition until sometime later that I was right where God wanted me, in God alone.
So during that time, the only thing that I could ever connect that to, we were also living in 2 trailers while we were building our house. We had a night trailer and a day trailer. And the day we signed the papers to sell the house we were living in was the day that we found out that I had twins. It wasn't just one baby, it was 2 babies at 7.5 months pregnant. So we had done a lot of scrambling to try to figure out how we were going to do this living in a trailer thing with 2 babies instead of 1. But during that time, I had signed my older 2 up for a gymnastics class. And then, of course, the babies shifted, so they were needing to take their nap right when it was time for me to go pick up the kids. And so I had asked someone if they would, would it be possible, would it work for me to come to your house and put my babies down for a nap and go pick up my kids and then come back and get the babies? And if they didn't go to sleep, then I would just take them with me. But, if I could do this thing, I think it was once a week for 6 weeks or something like that. And she said she needed to think about it, and then she came back and told me that it wasn't going to work for her. And so it was like, okay. And then the older couple where we went to meeting called us. And it was within probably a week, and said, do you need help with something? And it was like, I didn't quite really know what they might be talking about. And they said, well, the workers came and told us not to help you because you were taking advantage of the friends. And we told them that we would help you because you were like our grandkids. You were ours. They had professed at the same time as David's parents, and so they felt very connected. And so they said, so we thought since they told us that maybe you needed help. So is there something we can help you with? Well, it actually was a way better situation because they lived very close to where I needed to drop the kids off. And so they were all in, and I would take my babies there and put them down for a nap, and they loved it, and they were delighted with it. And so that was my, the solution for that. And then we had a second couple, and then we had a third couple. So it wasn't just one couple that told us that was what happened. It was 3.
So all 3 of those couples broke the rules and went against the workers.
Yes, they did.
I'm trying to be specific. That's They said, no, that's not going to work for us.
Right.
To disregard or diminish David and Bernitta or their family. We're not going to lose them. Are you still friends with them?
Well, 2 of those couples are no longer living, and one couple we're still friends with. The 2 couples that are no longer living, I would just like to say, one of the things that happened when we left meetings, because of all the distancing and the shunning, we concluded that the friends didn't want to have anything to do with us. So we isolated. And it's only been in the last 3 years, I think it was 3 years ago, we were having a conversation about it, where I said to you, I have just realized that many of these people that we lost connection with, it was not their fault, and it was not our fault. It was the system, going back to the system, because they were told and believed that we didn't want to have anything to do with them. And we got communicated our whole lives that when you left meetings, people didn't want to have anything to do with you. And
it was modeled.
It was modeled, and so realizing that there were many people that loved us and cared about us and would have stayed in contact with us. And so part of that isolation was self-imposed. Part of it was not. Part of it was real. But the 2 older couples, when we left meetings, we didn't stay connected with them. And, they're all 4 of them are gone now. And, that's one of those heartbreaking things of realizing that was on us. And I
Partly it was on us. But I know that those are relationships that when this life is over, those are going to be reconciled. Yeah. Like, we're going to be with them.
So I just want to share about an experience that just really showed me the goodness of God. I knew when we were getting to the place where we were realizing that we were not going to be continuing in meeting much longer. And part of what held me there was that I knew when we left, we would lose our friends. And we'd already lost, because of the Gilroy stuff, we'd already lost some of our family that we'd been very close to. And I did not want to be alone. We had moved a few years before that. We had moved to a different location, and there weren't any friends in the town where we lived, and I felt very alone. So I knew what that felt like, and I didn't want to do that again. But a neighbor lady, we talked because our sons were friends at school, and she invited me to a Bible study. And it was a God thing, because I don't know to this day why I said yes, because we were still going to meeting. And, but I did. I said yes, and I went, and here was a number of women that I knew from helping out at the school with the kids, because they were teachers or aides or whatever at the school. So it was people that, for the most part, I knew these women. I just didn't know them on that level. And so it was a beautiful time of developing that friendship, so that when we did leave meeting, I had those friends
You had a
already in place that God had given to me. And it was just so sweet to see. He was so personal. Yeah. And he met that need, even though I hadn't even verbalized it to him.
and you didn't even know you needed it.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
you just knew there was this chasm.
Didn't know it was there.
No.
So it was beautiful.
And it wasn't like it was because we had rejected what was there before. It was because it had been demolished. It was gone. You're referring to earthquake. It was just those kind of devastating earthquakes where there's nothing standing. And like for us, we were being shunned while we were still going to meeting. So we were being rejected.
Why? Can you explain that? Go deeper.
So after everything that happened with Gilroy, well, initially, as it was happening, we had some friends that we would go to process things with and have conversations. Well, at some point, the workers went around our field and told people not to discuss any of it with us, and so we were told that from multiple people that they didn't want to hear anything more about it. Well, it's like you're in the middle of the most painful, devastating experience you've ever had in your life, and your closest friends are saying, do not talk to us about that ever again.
That's isolation.
Yes.
And isolation is such a terrible thing, and they did it on purpose.
Yes.
It wasn't by default or accident. It was a tactic.
Yes. And so we were just like stunned. Like, this was this huge thing. And I don't know, I think of it as like, I've just got a diagnosis of cancer, or my child has just died, and you're telling me, I'm sorry, we can't talk to you about this. So yeah, we were consumed by it. And so, yeah, we were totally isolated. Shortly after that, we learned that one of the workers had gone to the people in our field and told them not to help us because we were taking advantage of the friends. So, to give some context, David traveled with his business, so he could be gone throughout the week. He could be gone 3 weeks out of the month and only home on the weekends, and sometimes gone on the weekends. I had 4 children, 4, 3, and 4, 2, and infant twins when that happened.
Okay, tell me about this song.
So this is a song that I learned at the first church that we attended regularly. And I would sing it to my children when they were going to bed. I sang it to my grandkids when they were fussy, and other children that I babysat. And we sang it to our mama when she was on her deathbed.
Oh, how sweet.
So now I'm all choked up and
I'm going to ask you to sing it. aren't you?
yes.
It's okay with God.
Okay.
Jesus, name above all names, beautiful Savior, glorious Lord, Emmanuel, God is with us, blessed Redeemer, living Word. Woohoo!
This is my song that when I'm in distress and under spiritual, kind of oppression, darkness, I sing this song because oftentimes I can't pray. And it is, oh Lord, you're beautiful
will encourage people not to worry about trying to find a church, to focus on pursuing God, like read your Bible, go on a walk, and just, go out in nature, whatever it is that takes you to a place where you feel close to God, and just ask Him, show me who you are, show me something, reveal yourself to me, and don't worry about fellowship right now. Get this relationship figured out first. And one of the reasons for that is very much like what you were telling us about the ladies in that Bible study and what God did for you in that. I have so many little snippets of stories of how God did that in my life. One of them was that David worked with this young gal. I didn't know it at the time, but she had just found God. She had just found Jesus. And she, every time I saw her, she invited me to go to her church. And she didn't know that I was already going to church the one right way. And so, I just kind of smiled at her, probably a little condescendingly. I don't know, but, she told me she would invite me to come. She would tell me where it was and what time it was and how wonderful it was. And I don't know. I know that she invited me to her church over 100 times. Anyway, so little story back here. Then there were several events that happened, and we had quit going to meeting, and we spent about a year not going to meeting, and then I got to the point where I was just like, I am so starved for fellowship. I need to go somewhere. And right about that time, I was making phone calls for a school event. I called somebody, and I could tell something was wrong. Like, she wasn't okay. And so I said, it's just somebody, a parent from my kid's school. And so I said, are you okay? And she said, well, no, not really. I said, do you want to talk? And she said, yes, but let me go private. So she went into another room, and she starts telling me about this woman that she was very close to, who, coming home from retreat, lady had a headache, it got so intense they took her to the hospital and discovered she had a brain tumor. Wow. And she wasn't going to live very long. They gave her 3 months to live. And so she tells me all of this, just pouring her heart out. And so, it took up all the rest of my time for making phone calls that evening. And so I, got off the phone with her, and next morning, get back on the phone to make my phone calls. Very first person I called, Bernitta, did you know Deborah Wesley? And it turns out that she was the wife of a man who was like a pastor of pastors in Chico. And so she was well known in the Christian circles in town. And I was like, no. And so, but I did hear about her last night. And so then she starts telling me more things. And then she wraps it up by saying, they're going to do a prayer meeting for her on Thursday night. So this is May. And this would have been May of 94. May of 93. And so I was still going to meeting, and I think I said I thought it was after, but I think it was while I was still going to meeting. But anyway, I just thought, I think I should go. It just, this, because of what happened with the lady the night before. So I went. Well, it wasn't a prayer meeting. It was the National Day of Prayer, and all of the churches in town all the pastors from the churches in town had come together for this evening event, and all of the Christians in town were invited to this event.
You mean Baptists and Lutherans and Presbyterians all got together?
And Catholics, and it was like Episcopalian.
Isn't that wonderful? Who knew?
And so here I am sitting in the congregation, and all those pastors did like a choir thing. Like, they were all on stage. There were over 50 pastors on stage. singing praise and worship. They led the worship, and it was incredible.
Wow.
But something else happened. And now this is reminding me, it definitely was before we quit going to meeting. I had just finished reading The Secret Sect. And so I'm in this kind of days of secret sect information. And the keynote speaker gets up to speak. And he begins to talk about the history of revival. And in that, he talks about the late 1800s. He talked about the faith mission. He talked about the Keswick conventions.
No way.
It was like he was confirming the authenticity, and I'm sitting here going, he didn't even know me.
But God did. God was
did.
sending you an email.
God did.
Before emails.
But that's not the end of the story. David was out of town on business, so I'm going to childcare to pick up my kids. And the people that are checking out the kids, they were my neighbors. They lived just down the street from me. And she is like, what are you doing here? Anyway, I'm telling her, I wish David could have been here. And she goes, well, we're the child care workers. We get to have a recording of it. So we'll have you over and you can listen to the recording. So when we went over and listened to the recording, they confessed to us that ever since we moved in, or ever since they moved in after us, they prayed for us every time they passed our house. So anyway, that was incredible. But the story's not over. So I said, I wasn't sure when it was. We were still going to meeting. A year later, when I decided it was time to go to church, I just needed fellowship. There was this one church that I knew where it was and what time it started, and I knew I would know somebody there.
Because you've been invited.
Because I've been invited so many times. So that's where I went, and the pastor was the guy who had been the keynote speaker at that National Day of Prayer.
Oh, wow.
God is amazing.
Incredible.
Specifically amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, that are starting to go to another church. It was also about a year from the time we left meetings before we started attending. It was actually a little over a year, a few months over a year, before we started attending a church regularly. So on Sunday morning, we'd sit down with our children and we would read a scripture. I had gotten an NIV Bible by then, and we would read through the scripture, and then we would ask them, so what is this saying? What do you think this is saying? And our oldest was in 8th grade, and our youngest was around 5, and we were amazed at how much, especially the 3 older children, had picked up from meetings, because they would regurgitate what we'd heard in meetings. And so Karl and I would say, well, yeah, that's what we've been taught, but let's read through this again and listen for what it's really saying. And so we'd read through it again, and then we would take it apart. And that's what we did for a little over a year with our kids. And in the meantime, I missed the singing. Our dad played the accordion, and we would sing together with him. We were fortunate in our meeting that we had people who knew how to sing, and we sang parts in meeting when we would sing the hymns, and I missed that. So probably about once a month, I would say to my husband, okay, tomorrow I'm going to go find a church because I just need a music fix. And so I would go. Didn't know that's what it was, but I would go for the worship, and I loved it. And then about a year after we quit going to meeting, I started feeling the need to find a church to attend. And so I started looking, and we were in at a restaurant one Sunday afternoon, and an older couple were sitting across the aisle from us, and he engaged with us and talking about our boys and where's the girls and one thing and another. And
then when our food came, we bowed our heads and prayed for our food and gave thanks. And so he asked us where we went to church. So we said, well, we're looking for a church at the moment. And so he invited us to a church that was actually on my list. I just hadn't gone to yet. And so then when we left there, I told my husband, so next Sunday when we're in town, because we were going to be gone for a couple of weeks, I want to go to this church because someone else had mentioned it to me as well. And so we did. He went with me, and we went to this church, and we spoke to the pastor afterwards, and I asked about this couple that we had met. And he said, well, they come to the earlier service, but he passed away. And his funeral had been, his celebration of life had been just that week prior to the first Sunday that we went to church. And we found out when he started telling us more of the details, we found out we met them on a Sunday. He passed away that Friday. That just, to me, it was just God saying, this was a God appointment. You met that man. He invited you to church. That was me.
Specifically.
Yes.
Divine providence.
Yes. And then the next Sunday, we went to the earlier service. We typically went to the later service because that's when the kids' stuff was. But we went to the earlier service so that we could talk to her and we could tell her that,
Wow.
we're coming to church because of your husband. So that was awesome. Yeah, that was a God appointment for sure.
I love that story.
So when David's dad died, we were in Florida, and we actually knew that the end was coming because he had decided to stop eating and drinking. He was done with life, and so we were planning to come out to California, go out to California to see him before he was gone, and he ended up passing away the morning that we were leaving to fly out. And so instead of going to see him, we were planning his funeral. And I remember we were on our way to the airport, and I brought up the funeral. And David's first response was, I am not going to hijack my dad's funeral. Well, I decided it was time for him to know what many of the family had said after his mom's funeral, which his dad planned. And that it was like they mocked it and they made fun of it. And they had these little quotes that they would say to each other, but they didn't say it to David. You have this opportunity here to show them who you are. And we don't have to have it be a meeting funeral. And then I told him about all the mockery after his mom's. And I said, this is what I don't want again.
Did she have a Christian funeral?
No, it was the workers that his dad had chosen for her funeral.
Oh, but the unprofessing family.
The unprofessing
We're
family
making fun
were
of
making
this.
fun
Got
of
it. Got
the
it.
funeral.
Got
And it like, I don't think either of the workers knew her. So, it was nothing about her, really. And we wanted his funeral. I just said, we have an opportunity to honor God. We have an opportunity to honor your dad and your mom. And, I don't know that that's going to happen. I had been to too many funerals that it became a gospel meeting instead of a funeral. Instead of a celebration of life or a memorial. And I also wanted his family to feel like they had a place to grieve and a place to process that grief and to have closure.
And to tell his stories.
And to tell his stories. And so David said, well, he would think about it. And So then he called his sister, and it hadn't occurred to his sister that we could do that. And then his other sister, the one that was very verbal about what she thought about their mom's funeral. And we learned that she had made the statement, if those people have that funeral, I will not be there. I'm not going to do that again. And so changing up the funeral became about actually having the family there. So I ended up spending the week following David and his sister around collecting stories. And, I had my computer and I'm following them around, asking them questions. And they were all over the place because there was grief and all of that stuff. But I had asked my pastor from Chico if he could be there, could have the service. And he was on vacation. And so he said, or he was going to be, but he said, I can come and kind of help you. And I would love to meet with the family and help process the grief. So he drove from Chico, California to Santa Rosa, California, which is about 4 hours, I think, and gathered as much of the family as we could to talk. And it was really sweet how he helped process and kind of drew out some of those thoughts, like, how are you feeling about this? And some of the real feelings of, there was some relief in some aspects because of the way things had been going.
As professing people, they came to listen to him?
No, David's dad was the last of the professing people in his family.
Got it.
So no one in his family was
it.
going to meeting. And in fact, the only one of his siblings the only one of his family, his generation that went to meeting was him. So his sisters, when they left home, they left
Got
home.
it.
But this pastor was wonderful and kind of helped us process, and basically in that place learned how sad the family was about their mother's funeral. And so he said, well, it's not uncommon to do a celebration of life for both of them once the second, they're both gone. And so he kind of gave us permission to include their mom. And so when I wrote the ceremony, that's weird, the service. And so it's like we told his story, and then we told her story, and then when they met, and then their story together.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's so redemptive.
Yeah, it was such a blessing to write it. And then the other thing we did was we invited people to share stories, and then we inserted them into the lifeline of where they happened, the timeline.
Sweet.
And if they were present, we asked them to share, just to stand up and share. We asked everybody to prepare it ahead of time and submit it to us, and we gave them a time limit, and we included some workers that we knew had been precious to his parents, and we invited one of the local friends who, after not answering our message for several days, finally told David's sister. David and I each separately sent him a message asking if he would contribute. And then he told David's sister that he didn't want to have anything to do with it because he knew it wasn't what Earl would have wanted. And that was really heartbreaking. David's sister was devastated by that, like she didn't understand. Anyway, the way it turned out, it was like we had a time of honoring both of his parents, honoring God, honoring his desire for God, and honoring the family. And it opened up conversations that we had never had before as a family. And we also had a friend who had also gone to meeting, who was actually the one who officiated. And he learned shortly before the service that David's father had officiated at his grandmother's service. And so it was like this
Full circle.
full circle, and it was really sweet.
I love that story.
So Colina was talking about how she loved worship, and she had to just go get some worship. Now, it's not that I don't love worship, but my favorite thing is reading the Bible and digging into the Bible and all of that. So when I first started going to church, like they just went on and on and on with the singing stuff. And it was just like, oh, why? And so I learned this little cheat, like I just go late every time and sneak in right before the sermon started. So, and my comment about it was that I could just skip that and get there for the good part.
I'm with Colina. I'm with you, Colina.
Now I love worship too, but that was where I was then.
Can I insert right here? And for me, when I went for the worship, I mean, it was important that the teaching was biblical, but I really didn't care.
Here's a wafer. God forgive you, my daughter.
Oh,
You need to go to confession.
but I remember one night, it was a Wednesday night, and I was standing behind one of the pastors. There were two pastors at that church, and I was standing behind one of them. And I had got there in time for worship that day. And so I was watching him worship. And as I watched him worship, it was just like, there is something going on with him that I don't get. And I want that. And so that was where I started realizing that there was more to worship than singing. And
Full body experience.
yeah.
Heart, soul,
he had
mind,
his hand
spirit.
raised, and he was just, it was just him and God. And I was just like, oh, this is something different. And then I had another experience, that one was on a Sunday morning, where there was this lady that would go right down in front every Sunday, and she would raise her hands and she would sing and dance, and it was very disturbing. And I was very judgmental and critical, and I just wished that she would stop making such a scene. And I mean, I'm sitting there just, oh man, it was disgusting. It really was. And in
Revolting.
Revolting.
Just say it.
In the middle of all of that judgment, I heard that voice say, "It isn't for you, it's for me." And I love it. Don't judge her sacrifice. And that was, when you ask, like, how does God speak to you, or how does he correct you? I didn't feel shamed. I didn't feel condemned. But I felt corrected by a loving Father who said, no, this is not acceptable. You don't judge what somebody else is giving to me.
Oh man, that's beautiful.
And that totally changed how I see worship. Because when people are up there on that stage playing their instruments, it's for God, it's not for me. Yeah. And the songs that they choose to sing, it's for God, it's not for me. And it's not about whether or not I like the music, because it's not for me. It's for him. Yeah. And with that shift of mindset, I am able to go into a church service and enter into whatever kind of worship. I will admit, I love really talented people playing and singing.
And I do love the old hymns probably more. They're so meaty and pithy. And Elizabeth Elliot said, it's the old hymns that get you through the dark night.
Yeah. And there are some new hymns that are absolutely incredible.
There are.
Yeah, so I just want to fully confess that I no longer intentionally go to church late to miss the music. Although I am not a person that gets places on time very often, and I may or may not have been quoted to say that God tried and tried and tried to get me places on time, and then he gave up and gave me twins to give me a good excuse.
So we've been doing a Bible study on Revelation. We've gone through the book of Revelation this last year. And one of the things in my love of worship, one of the things that has just really hit my heart is listening to worship songs that are straight out of Revelation. And it gives such depth and meaning to those words.
Do you remember the song? Do you remember?
Oh, it's not a song.
It's a lot of songs.
It's different songs that will, have a phrase or, this. Yeah, it just
An echo.
That's out of Revelation.
Yeah.
So there's some songs they're straight out of Revelation, like the one "Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord God Almighty." That's
Who was
Revelation
and is to come.
But there's so many songs that just come up, and it's given them even more depth and meaning. After we were reading some of that in Revelation, and I was in church, and they sang one of those songs that was just straight out of Revelation, and I just stood there and wept. It was so incredible.
Yeah. And that's pure worship.
Yeah.
That's when you have that, you're experiencing God in that moment.
Yeah.
And probably about the same time. So we are a part of a home-based church right now. So 3 days of the month we meet in a home. And then 1 day a month we all gather together at the church. And so it was in that gathering time, and the pastor said, our worship is going to be focused on praising God and who he is. Every song was straight out of Revelation. And it was like afterwards, David hasn't been doing the study, but I've been sharing things with him. And afterwards I'm like, I have to read this to you, because all of our songs were straight out of this chapter. So on the way home I was reading the chapter to him, and it was just like we were both having those like, wow.
Yeah, it makes you just feel overcome with there's no words.
Yeah. And Revelation isn't scary anymore.
No. Oh, it's so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we never read it
Correct.
or studied it.
Yeah.
Didn't know how to study it. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
I have an exciting story. Just like then and later, I guess. Remember the story about standing behind the pastor and watching him worship? So, I don't know. Fast forward about 10 years. I was in church and I was worshiping. And sometimes I just cannot keep my hands down. They just have to be up. And, Anyway, so I'm worshiping totally about me and God. And when it was all over, and I went to sit down, the man behind me leaned forward and said, I have just so appreciated your heartfelt worship this morning. And it was just like, I'm demonstrating that this isn't just singing to someone else. It was like
it was done to you.
Like it was done to me.
Yeah, it has to be, handed off.
Yeah. But anyway, that was just the sweet moment for me of like, I actually know how to worship now.
You had to learn.
And he commented on how watching me worship was it just pointed him to God. It was about God. It wasn't about me.
Yeah.
But he appreciated it because of his own experience. And that was just really sweet.
Yeah, it isn't about us. It's uninhibited. It's uninhibited body language lifted. You know, there's no ceiling on there. I have a little tiny story about, I heard a pastor say this one time, when we lift our hands, it's like a little tiny 3-year-old running to their daddy and lifting their arms up, and then the dad finishes the gesture and picks them up. It's like, pick me up, I want to be with you. And that always hit me. And it doesn't matter if my elephant ears are flopping on my arms. Nothing matters. It's about God lifting me. Yeah.
I remember a time shortly after things had gotten really hard going to meeting, and we were feeling very shunned, and you know, we were still going to meeting, and it was still very important to us, but it was hard. And it was right after my twins were born. They were babies, and it was after Sunday morning meeting. Monday, we stopped at the grocery store, and I went in to grab something, and David stayed in the car with the 4 kids. And something that had been on my mind a lot was, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, by your love for one another. And I was not feeling very loved at meetings and by the friends. And I was hurting pretty deeply. And so I go into the grocery store, and it's probably in January of '89. My babies were still pretty small. And I saw who I thought was the OBGYN nurse over at the vegetable counter. And I walked right up to talk to her because she was a twin, and we had had lots of conversations about twins. And she had been born without thumbs. And anyway, that's significant in the story. I walk right up to talk to her about that I had had my babies, and you know. So just as I got there, I realized this was her identical twin sister because she had thumbs. And so I'm right up next to her, and she turns to look at me, and I said, "I'm sorry, I thought you were your sister." And she's like, "Oh, that happens a lot. Did you just have a baby?" You know, like she knew. And I said, "Well, actually, I just had twins, and because I knew she was a twin, I wanted to talk to her." And she says, "Oh, you know, how old are they? Do you have family close that can help you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, I see you're dressed up like you've just been to church. Is your church family helping you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I'd find a new church." And it was like that tone of voice and everything. And I walked away from her thinking.
Tell me what she said again.
Okay, so she said, "I'd find a new church." And there was like, it wasn't anything like that felt particularly godly or spiritual or anything like that. She would be amazed if she knew how that impacted me, because here I am, a new mom of twins. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I walked away going, "You mean if I was going to one of those false churches that somebody would be helping me?" And it was just this huge moment for me where I felt so alone and isolated. And it was just like, that never occurred to me, that people in churches
Do that.
took care of
Or that the absence of it was off.
Right, yeah, it was just, and that stayed with me so long, that that was what worldly churches, it was like what they would expect in a church.
That was
I guess.
normal.
It was normal.
So I want to tell about having a re-wedding. just a couple of years after we'd started going to the church that we attended for 18 years, we were invited to a wedding. I had never been to a Christian wedding before in my life. And I wept through that whole ceremony. There were two pastors from different churches doing the ceremony together, because one had been the pastor of the groom and one was the pastor of the bride. Mm-hmm. And they did the ceremony together. It was absolutely beautiful. And I sat there and cried because I had never seen God in the middle of a marriage ceremony. And afterwards, I looked at my husband and I said, I want one of those. We had been married 19 years by that time.
Huge.
So for our 20th anniversary, we had a God-centered church wedding in a church with a pastor and just the whole 9 yards. It was absolutely beautiful. Not that I hadn't felt like I was married before, but I made a commitment to my husband in front of the Lord that our wedding, our marriage, would represent Him.
Include Him.
And yes, include Him. And that He would be the center of our marriage. It was amazing. It was beautiful. I loved it.
Did you have a dress and everything?
I didn't do a wedding dress because, well, I am just very, very practical. So, I did a dress that I felt like, well, I could wear it for other things. But it was a beautiful, beautiful pink, soft pink. I look really good in pink. It was a beautiful, soft pink, lacy, not anything that I would ever have worn to a professing function of any kind. And pink shoes. I had
pink shoes?
So anyway, and I had my hair done. Somebody helped me with my makeup.
Did you feel beautiful?
I did. I wore pearls. I felt stunning.
Did you feel like the beloved little bee and the beloved big bee?
Yes. So, yeah, I would say that was my beloved moment when I felt beautiful, I felt loved, I felt God, and I didn't think about it at the time, but now looking back, I really appreciate the pastor being so, he treated it like it was our wedding, our initial wedding. Other than he did make the point of, that it was our 20th anniversary. But yeah, it was beautiful.
He got it.
He did. He
got
did. So.
That is a beautiful beloved story. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing it.
So speaking of learning that we're beloved, I was on a mission trip to Mexico, and we had gone to an orphanage. The children weren't there that day, but we had been invited to come to pray, do a prayer walk of the area, the home, and all of that. And so I had gone to the play structure to pray. And the group that ran the home and the man who was hosting us had told us that they were really wanting to buy this home so that it could be a permanent home for the children that they looked after. And so I was praying, and I was just like pleading with God, like, God, would you please, like just pleading with God. And I walked over, and there were some of those you know, the chains with the little triangle on the play structure. And I just walked over and I took a hold of those little triangles, and as I wrapped my fingers around them, it was just like this warm electrical presence that just like settled over me. And I just heard God say, of course I will do that. I love them. But when he said that, it wasn't just them. Like, that was the moment that this warm thing around me and the words that he spoke, and it just went so deep in my heart that was his love for me. And I stood there holding onto those little triangles, and I just didn't want to let go, because it was like the moment I touched them that it was just like, God loves me
Too.
Yes.
Like that.
He loves me like that. He loves me too. And I realized in that moment that when I pray from a position of pleading and begging, how dishonoring that is of God. Because it's like not recognizing him for who he is, and not recognizing his heart and his compassion and his kindness. And of course, his heart is for the fatherless. The Bible tells us that. Why would I need to plead for the one who has been pleading with us to care for the marginalized, to care for the orphan, to care for the widow, to care for the poor? Like, of course that's his heart. And it was not only me seeing his love for me, but there was this like realization of how he wanted me to love other people. So.
And I want to add to this, because I think, I'm going to disagree just a little bit. I think God loves it when we beg and plead and ask him, because anytime we try to connect with him, he's like inclining his ear, like, tell me more, darling. Tell me more. Mm-hmm. Say it again. Say it louder. Mm-hmm. Say it more often. He wants connection with us. So if that connection is begging and pleading, I kind of think he likes it no matter what.
He's okay with that too.
So I think he likes everything.
You're right. He does.
He's not a condemning God like that.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of old thinking. I think he's just so excited when we come to him with all of it. Mm-hmm. All of it. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. There's this huge way that God blessed me when my aunt was dying. We had not been in a relationship for about 17 years when my father passed away. And when she said goodbye to me after the service, she hugged me and said, let's not let this happen again. You know, it's been too long. Let's not let this happen again. And so there were some sweet things that God did in the next year and a half, opening some doors for connection and relationship, and over the distance I was building relationship with her. And so I got word. We had been down in Mexico on a mission trip, and when I got back I had messages on my answering machine that she didn't have much longer to live. And so I decided I wanted to go see them. I hadn't been there for years, and I didn't want to impose in these, precious moments with her family, but I wanted to see her and to say goodbye to her. And so I called them. They told me I could come, and I was driving down there, but I was in a lot of turmoil about how to do this.
Because they're professing? Was she professing? In
yes.
The okay.
Yes. They were professing. But beyond that, there had been this brokenness between our families after what had
Oh,
happened
yes.
at Gilroy.
Yes.
So we had not been in relationship for 17 years. And while I had made this little connection with her, I hadn't made any connection with any of the rest of the family. So on the way there, I was just having lots of conversations with God about what that needed to look like, and one of the things I asked for was I wanted to just have a restoration, like just this full restoration, so that when I went to her funeral, that there was nothing there that left me sitting, I just wanted complete forgiveness and reconciliation with her. So I got there, and she could no longer speak. Well, she couldn't speak clearly. Those that had been around her for a while could understand her communication, but me just coming in, I couldn't understand it. And so when I greeted her, she waved me to lean down over her bed, and she put her arms around me and was hugging me and saying something over and over. And I didn't understand what she was saying, but it was sweet. And then I was washing dishes with her daughter-in-law, and somebody asked me if she had been able to talk when I got there. And I said, well, she was saying something, but I didn't know what she was saying. And her daughter-in-law said, she was saying, sweet, sweet girl. And, that just touched me deeply, but it wasn't over yet.
Stop crying.
It had been my intent to go spend the night at a hotel, come back and see her again in the morning, and then drive back home. And my uncle invited me to stay, to spend the night. And he said, but we do have Wednesday night meeting tonight. And I said, that's okay, I'm okay with that. And he kind of questioned me, and I said, no, I'll come to meeting. And he said, you will? I'm like, yeah. So I was there in meeting, and then it was, I had just been, God, how do I be here? And God just kept telling me to serve. Well, I learned that the family had been taking 2-hour shifts through the night, and none of them had had a full night's sleep. And I was like, let me stay up with her tonight, and you all go to bed. If anything happens, I'll call you, but let me be with her. And so they did. They went to bed. And so they did. They went to bed, and they let me stay up with her that night. And so after taking care of some of her needs, she was at the point where she could only, I was giving her something to drink by drops on her tongue of water. And so I had just done that, and she had her hands right here.
Colina's husband, better half.
Hey.
Hi, Karl.
So my aunt was laying there in bed with her hands like up here, and she could move them about like that. And so she started doing this to me. And so I'm leaning over, and she just keeps doing it, and she just keeps motioning me closer until we were just like nose to nose. And then she put her hands on my cheeks, and she just began to rub my cheeks, and we were just nose to nose, gazing into each other's eyes, weeping. And God just totally removed everything. It was just like this miracle. There were no words. She couldn't talk anymore. And it was just gazing into each other's eyes and years of hurt and misunderstanding. And it was just like this beautiful love And it was so God, so like He fully answered my prayer that there was no hurt left, there was no pain left, there was this beautiful, loving relationship, and I just felt so fully loved by her, and yeah, it was just an incredible goodbye. To be able to let go of years of hurt.
Oh man, that's sweet.
And that my memories of her are now more about that moment
Than anything else.
It was incredible.
Could you share in it a little bit, just by connecting with Bernitta? Could you kind of feel that healing too for yourself?
Yes. And I had a sweet, not like that, but a sweet moment with that aunt as well.
She's a weeper like me. We don't wear mascara.
That was in July, wasn't it?
July.
In about a month before that, Mom was living with Karl and I at the time, and she wanted to go see Annie Mary, so I told her I would take her, and so it was like a 3-hour drive, and I went out to the car, and I saw a sprig of columbine that was blooming. And God reminded me that was one of her favorite flowers. And it was really past the time for columbine to be blooming. And so I went and cut that sprig, and then I got a little rosebud. And I got a little bud vase, and I put it in, and I took that to her. And when I brought it in the house to her, she took it and she said, "Did you know that columbine is my favorite flower?" And I said, yes. I was reminded of that this morning when I saw the blossom there. Just felt like that was a God moment, that He gave me a little reminder to bless her.
So you remember all of Grandma's teacups in Gilroy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went there, I would go the week before prep started and be there for the first week of preps. And so I would help Grandma with the things that she liked to get done before the workers got there. And so she had this big cabinet full of teacups. Remember how she nested them in fours? And anyway, so she would let me wash them.
You got special treatment.
I did. And I was little, and I just was so amazed how she didn't hover over me to make sure I didn't break them. She just let me wash them. And so anyway, I always dreamt of someday getting some of her cups. Well, turns out that I think some of them actually belonged to the workers, and she just kept them for them. But there were quite a few that were hers, that had been gifts to her from different workers and stuff. And so when Grandma died, I didn't get any of her cups. And I was a little miffed about that. I didn't think it was fair, and I blamed it on a few people. And I groused and grumbled about it more than once. And one day when I was having a pity party, I heard that little voice say, you could just start a collection in memory of Grandma. And it was just like it had never occurred to me that I could just start buying my own teacups. And so I had started buying my own teacups. But there was this teacup that I always heard about from Annie Mabel and from Grandma and from Annie Mary. I always wanted a Shelley. And so
That's what it says.
It's a Shelley. This is my little gift from God. I was sharing this with a friend of mine in a Bible that was in my Bible study group, and I told her about it. I told her about how I had gone online looking for a Shelley, and they were $120 for this design on a Shelley cup. And I'm telling her about it, and I said, I can't justify spending $120 on a teacup. And she says, well, why don't you just ask God for it? And I'm like, I'm not going to ask God for a teacup. Like, God's concerned about bigger things than that. And she said, your desire for a teacup is about more than material things. It's a story of reconciliation and wounding, healing wounds. And I think that God would honor that.
Oh, man.
And so I said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. I'll ask God for a teacup. I cry later. So I said, I'm going to ask God for a teacup. And she said, be specific.
Oh, my God.
Because when you're specific, it's very, very clear when he answers. You know it's him. So I prayed the prayer. I don't know how long later it was. Quite a bit of time had passed, though. When this Bible study group, we would move from house to house, and we always would have tea, and we would always have teacups. That was like our thing. And so we were at this lady's house, and she says, she was opening her cupboards for us to pick the teacup we wanted. And then she says, oh, Bernitta, come with me and help me. I have some more. So she took me back to this cupboard in the hallway, and it was down in the bottom, and she says, if you'll get down on your knees and you'll get all the way back to the back, there's some clear back there. They were my mother-in-laws, and I didn't have a great relationship with my mother-in-law, and I just didn't want to be reminded, so I tucked them away. And so I start pulling them out, and there was my teacup. And so in my mind, it was like God was answering my prayer by me getting to drink out of this teacup when I was at her house. So I came walking out carrying my teacup.
And you were good enough with that.
And I was good with that. I felt like God had answered my prayers. And so I'm walking out carrying this teacup. And I get out, and the lady that had told me to pray for it was facing me, sitting at the table, and she looked at me and she goes, is that it? And I went, so nobody else in the group, there were about 8 ladies, and nobody else in the group knew anything about this story. And so I drank out of the teacup, and it was just so precious. I was just like, God loves me. He gave me this
I'm his
teacup.
favorite.
I'm his favorite.
A beloved moment.
And
Yes,
so
yes.
that was the end of that day, but I went away just feeling so loved. Well, then I had neck surgery. I had to have a fusion in my neck, and so I couldn't really go anywhere, and so all my ladies came to me. And this particular day, the lady who had this teacup, she came late, and she walks in the room, and she has a gift box, and she walks over to me, and she says, Bernitta, this morning I was just feeling so grateful for you, because I had started this group, and she says, I was feeling so grateful for you, and I asked God how I could bless you, and I think he told me to bring you this. And she set it on my lap, and I knew what it was. Like, I started opening that box, and as I started opening the box, I looked up at my friend Terry, and she, we're looking at each other, and she's just beaming. And I opened it up, and I pulled out my teacup. And then I looked at Shirley, and I said, and I shared the story with Shirley about this teacup. And she says, oh, Bernitta, sometimes I just don't know for sure if I'm actually hearing from the Lord or if I'm just making stuff up in my head. And so she said, thank you. And she says, I am just so grateful right now that by listening and bringing you this teacup, God just showed me that I do hear his voice.
It was confirmation for her.
Yes.
That your other friend didn't tell her?
No.
God told her.
God told her.
Specifically.
And yeah. And Terry and I, it was like we had that conversation at one time. And we never talked about it, even the day that we sat there across the table knowing that Shirley had my teacup.
And you weren't coveting it.
I wasn't
you
coveting
were just totally
it. I
happy.
was just so thankful that I felt like God heard me when I sat there drinking out of it. I just was so delighted. And we never talked about it that day. We didn't talk about it to anybody else in the group. And Shirley got confirmation that she heard God's voice. And I learned that God cares about the natural things and the natural desires in our heart.
Yes.
And that he listens. And he likes to give good gifts to his children.
He's delighted.
And he doesn't separate spiritual from everyday. It's
No.
all
One.
intertwined.
And I have a confession to make. I have a hard time letting people use this cup.
That's okay.
And the reason I have a hard time letting people use this cup is I don't want to have a hard time forgiving them if they broke it.
Could I just put my lips on it? Could I just like put my lips on
you
it?
can touch my God cup.
Okay.
My gift from God.
It's kissable. I mean, the cups always have to have a kissable rim. That is a beautiful cup.
So
That's a beautiful story. And I just love it that we're just crying our eyes out. Bernita's more stoic than us.
my daughter says,
She's got mascara on too.
my daughter says, Mom, I don't know how you're feeling. And she gets very frustrated with me because she can't read me. And I look at her and I say, honey, don't worry about it too much because most of my life I didn't know how I felt either.
You know what? Isn't that true?
Yeah.
But everyone knows how we feel all the time. It's good.
Well, you know, part of the reason for me is because, well, she always got the, too emotional or too dramatic or too...
Yeah, too sensitive.
Too much. Oh, I've had that too.
Yeah.
Too
And
sensitive.
so I didn't want to be that.
Yeah.
So the reason, it's like, ooh, I need to stuff it. So it was all about, trying to be better, I guess.
Longing to do better?
Yeah, longing to do better.
One time, it was after we'd left meeting, and it was actually my pastor that said it to me. And I don't remember the situation, but I was crying. And, the tears are flowing. And he made the comment to me that I was being too sensitive. And I was just devastated by that. And so, because something had happened that had hurt me, and he told me I was being too sensitive. So I was telling my sister about it. And she said, you are not too sensitive. You are just as sensitive as God made you. So I own that 100% now.
She just referred to me as my sister. We have called each other sister for a very long time. And when I was, the summer before my junior year of high school, my parents moved to Northern California. And they got us an apartment so that I could finish high school in the same town where I went K, all the way through. And so we had this apartment, and she's 2.5 years older than me, so she was just barely out of high school, but she was my mom. But she also had the nickname Granny from the time she was 10?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Because I kept everybody in line.
Yeah.
The mother hen.
She was the mother hen. And so, I was in good hands. But anyway, so we, somewhere along the line, started calling each other sister all the time. Hey, sister, da, da, da. And the brother, just older than us, he entered into that too and called us sister. So there was one summer when she was down in Southern California, and I was staying with my parents, and she was working for a chiropractor, and I was working with her, and we would call each other sister. And
Didn't even think about it.
you know, it was just normal for
We were
us.
working together, and we just
And so he asked one time why we called each other sister, and he thought it was
Sister wives.
he thought it was something about our religion.
Oh,
you know,
goodness.
it was like, you know, sister so and so,
Oh, yeah.
right? You know, that we called each other sister. And it was like, why do you call each other sister? And it was like,
he asked, "Is it a religious thing?" We're like, "No. Why would you think that?"
no, it's well, everything else was a religious thing, but it was like, because she's my sister.
You're beautiful sisters together. It's like you can read each other. It's even delightful.
So it was about 10 years from the time things started going sideways in meetings and stuff, you know, when my grandfather died to when we left meetings. And it was a process of learning about God and learning His love and learning truth and to understand Scripture, and didn't realize how precious and special it was until after we were out. But God led my husband and I together, and Bernitta and her husband. We were led together as we were learning about God, and we were ready to leave more or less at the same time. And I realized later what a blessing that was, because we didn't have that split that can cause so much hurt and so much pain that some are experiencing now. Because, yeah, God just brought us together, and I don't know why He did that, but it was beautiful. And when I said to him, "I'm done going to meeting, what about you?" And he said, "I've just been waiting for you."
Oh, sweet.
And you know, the other thing was we left meetings before our parents. And we didn't really realize what a blessing this was either. But there was never a time that it even entered my mind that my parents would cut us off because we quit going to meeting. It just wasn't, it was never a thought. So while we were shunned and alone in the sense of our friends and our community and our meeting, I never ever even considered the thought of my parents cutting us off because we weren't going to meeting anymore. That just wasn't a part of the picture, and that's something that I am so thankful for, that I didn't have to go through that too. And it breaks my heart when I hear that people are experiencing that, and I know you experienced some of that with Craig's parents. And,
Our parents actually even went to church with us
Yes,
when
they
we
did.
started going to church. They were still going to meeting, but they would come to church with us when they came to visit.
Could I just posit this? That any father who loves to sing "How Great Thou Art" isn't really in it. He's in it more by default than in it. In you know what I mean? Anybody who sings "How Great Thou Art" gets it.
So, you know how people will say, "Oh, I learned this song, went to this church, and I heard this song," and you know, it's a new song to me. But our dad, he didn't sing just from the hymn book. He sang hymns from other books. What was it? The Road Heavers?
we had Road Heavers, and we had the Redemption hymn book.
The Redemption,
and
yeah.
we had, remember that little paperback one? It was like gospels.
Yeah.
They sang
all those songs. And one of my earliest memories is my dad, his brother, and his two sisters standing around the piano at Grandpa and Grandma's and singing, "There is power, power, power."
Oh, yeah.
In the
We
blood.
grew up with those songs.
Okay, we're gonna be really cheesy.
My chains are gone. I've been set free. Amazing grace. My